So I think I looked at my parents and said, teaching kids is pretty wonderful, first of all. It's rewarding. And then teaching kids specifically overseas as opposed to in Arkansas. In music, in Arkansas, you would be expected to do a marching band for football games.
Mm,
And I looked at international school music programs and I saw jazz bands and concert bands and musical theater and things that I really loved more than maybe marching bands for football games.
mm,
And not that marching bands are bad, but that's just kind of not my passion.
mm,
And I said, yeah, international teaching is pretty great. There are certainly some downsides. You have to endure some jobs that are not your dream job.
mm.
And you have to, again, that word flexibility, like in Marrakesh, I had to be flexible. I had to teach first graders, and I'm certainly not an elementary music specialist.
Yeah, you put your time in.
Yeah, you just kind of learn what needs to be done.
Welcome to the 74th episode of Tokyo Alumni Podcast. Today, our guest is from Arkansas. He grew up overseas in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Tokyo, Japan. He attended the Berklee College of Music, where he studied film scoring, and his instrument was the vibraphone. After college, he moved to LA, where he was juggling film scoring, band composing, and arranging, and playing the piano at the Improv Comedy Theater. He then focused on international teaching, first at the American School of Marrakech, Morocco, then the American School of Lima in Peru, and then on to Shanghai American School in China. He is currently at the Canadian Academy in Kobe, where he teaches band and choir. Welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Thanks, Nicholas. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, fellow teacher on today. So you have a quite substantial experience with the various international schools as both a student and as a teacher. So I think that's going to be the focal point of the conversation today. But first, in your own words, I know I just introduced you, but can you just tell us, like in a minute, who you are, what you do?
Sure. I've been in music my whole life, and my parents decided to go overseas. So that's the Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Tokyo, Japan part. And I just fell in love with the international school lifestyle, and eventually got into it myself when I was in my early 30s. So that was Morocco, and then Peru, and then China, and now Japan again.
Hmm.
This is the third time in my life I've lived in Japan, and I'm loving it. I'm teaching band and choir and having a great time.
So with the international schools, you mentioned as a child, Saudi Arabia and Japan. Can you tell us a bit about your sort of experience as a student?
It was hard at first. It was a 1 year deal when I was in the second grade and at the Saudi Arabian International School of Riyadh. That's what it was called at the time. They've changed their name since then. And then we went back when I was in the fifth grade for 5 more years in a row. And that was really like, okay, I'm not going to see my friends in Arkansas much anymore. This is kind of a permanent thing that we live overseas now. So it wasn't easy. And my parents worked at the school that I went to. So I could go into their classrooms and whatever and see them and sort of take comfort in that. But I was a kid from Arkansas, and this was Saudi Arabia, and it was different, and there were kids from all over the world. But eventually, I grew to love it. And then when we moved to Japan, when I was in high school, that was hard again. And it took maybe a year or two for me to get into that and really love Tokyo. But eventually I did. So it's a lot of change that was hard, but eventually I grew to love it.
Hmm. You have an interesting experience of comparing sort of Saudi Arabia to Japan, and you said that change was hard. What parts of that, change in location were the most difficult to adapt to?
I think any kid, wants to be near their friends and wants to know who their teachers are and that kind of thing. But Saudi Arabia is obviously such a different culture, and women had to cover their faces in public, and I just didn't know what was going on at first. But eventually, I learned to really embrace those differences, and wow, this is new and different. But at first, you don't say, wow, this is new and different. You say, wow, this is new and scary, and I don't know
Mm.
what's going on. And then I probably said, well, this is new and scary again in Tokyo when I was about 15, when we moved to Tokyo. And of course, I didn't speak the language. Now I speak Japanese pretty well. But yeah, it was just, how do restaurants work? How do grocery stores work? What do you do with your family on the weekends? It was all different, and change always takes some getting used to.
Mm. And in the beginning, you weren't a teacher. You went to LA, and what was the experience like there at that point in your career? Was there a specific sort of end point that you wanted to get to before you decided to switch towards teaching?
I showed up in LA with no job and no apartment, and I got an apartment after 2 days. And I knew that I loved music for movies, like Star Wars soundtracks and Indiana Jones soundtracks and all that kind of thing. And I knew I loved writing music. So I looked into that, and I just fell into playing piano for improv comedy shows
Mm.
through a fluky chain of events. It was a type of work where you didn't have to be really an amazing pianist, and I certainly am not an amazing pianist. But if you can play something that sounds Japanese or something that sounds like Indiana Jones or whatever, I was able to get work that way, and I loved it. I got to where I was doing that about 4 or 5 nights a week. But thanks to my parents, I knew that international music teaching was out there, and I knew that I was probably pretty well suited for it. So finally, when I was about 30 or 31, I made real strides towards going in that direction with my career.
A common question I get, so I'm in my 30s now, and some of my former classmates say they want to go into international teaching. So for you, that earlier steps of like getting the teaching license and all that, like how difficult was it to make that transition from sort of being in non-teaching occupation to going into international teaching and into classrooms?
It was a bit difficult. I went to take classes at the College of New Jersey, which costs a bit of money. And I had to get a bunch of paperwork together. People had to write me letters of recommendation. And it was a big change. Of course, I had to move out of my Los Angeles apartment when I got a job, but I went to a job fair in Cambridge, Massachusetts,
Mm.
and I talked to someone from Iraq.
Mm.
That's not a joke. I actually had a job lead in Iraq, and
Oh, wow.
I had a lead on a job in Libya, and all kinds of, but I just got really lucky with the American School of Marrakech, Morocco. So um, yeah, they took a chance on me, and I think I was flexible enough to say, okay, I'll pack up my stuff in Los Angeles and move to Morocco.
That's fascinating that you said TCNJ. I'm also a TCNJ graduate, so I guess that makes it two of
Oh,
us. Yeah.
oh yeah. I, I ended I I ended up doing one summer in Bangkok and then 2 summers in Majorca, Spain.
Yeah, same. I did two in Bangkok and one in Mallorca. But yeah,
Mm,
it's great to hear how long that program has been around. It's still going
yeah.
strong. Yeah.
Um, Stuart.
Yep. Stuart Carroll.
Yeah.
Still the head honcho of it. So to sort of reiterate what you said, and it's similar, I guess, to what I tell people who ask me, who I know, I'm sure it's similar with you. At least 10, I would say, former ASIJ classmates has asked me, how can I become a teacher? Like I see what you do, or I remember ASIJ. There are fond times. I do have to remind them not every school is like ASIJ though. and then but basically to reiterate what you said, essentially get that teaching cert, go to a job fair. And the biggest thing is actually what, as you said, with Iraq, Libya, you have to be flexible that first year. And I think that's what really impedes a lot of people from joining, because at least half of the people who asked me have been like, oh, I'm located in this country, or this city with these 5 schools. And if it's not these 5 schools, I'm not, and I say, okay, well, you might have some difficulty then.
Yeah,
But ultimately, so you end up in Morocco. How long were you in Morocco for?
2 years.
And I guess enough time has passed. Is that because, like most schools that teachers go for their first job, was it like not the most desirable place, or?
Yeah, it's a smaller school, and they asked me to teach a lot of elementary music, which is not my strength.
Hmm.
My strength is really high school. So teaching first graders, it was fun, but I'm not claiming that I'm really a specialist at that.
Hmm.
And so that was 2 years, and Marrakesh is a great town, and I was saving a decent amount of money, and everything was fine, except for the teaching elementary music part, really. And so that was the main thing that made me kind of say, what's the next thing? And then the next thing ended up being FDR in Lima, Peru.
Hmm. So yeah, wow, Latin America, totally different surrounding. How would you compare Latin American international schools to the ones in Tokyo?
The ones in Tokyo, um, I would say, obviously, Latin America is known for being a little more loosey-goosey, kind of, there aren't such official rules for everything. And I found that to be true, but it was still, they had their own way of doing things, and my goal in Lima was just to build up the band and choir programs, and I spent 3 years trying to do that. I did worry about security a little bit, but I had a great apartment and no problem there. And I took a taxi to and from school. And some people stay for 20 or 30 years. I stayed for 3 years, and it was fantastic.
So your first post is 2 years, your next post is 3 years. At this point, are you kind of getting sick of jumping around though from country to country?
No. I love jumping around. As much as I love Kobe, where I am now, I'm thinking about jumping, like I always think about jumping.
Mm,
So yeah, 3 years in Peru was fantastic. But again, I sort of said, what's the next thing?
mm. And then was Shanghai the next location?
Right. Shanghai American School. And that was really, I knew that I was in there with some very experienced music teachers, and I was learning a lot. And my facilities were really fantastic, the band room and everything. And I got married right towards the end of my time in Peru. I got married. And yeah, Shanghai ended up being 5 years, and
Mm,
it could have been 6 or 7, but my wife and I just said, let's try the next thing after 5.
mhm. And then the next thing ended up being Canadian Academy. So was that part of, so at this point, we're talking about a decade of experience. Was that always sort of in the back of your mind, coming back to Japan at some point?
Maybe I don't want to hang my happiness on any one country or any one school.
Mm,
I don't want to say, like, if I'm not in Japan, I can't be happy.
mm,
But because I think we can be happy other places. But the truth is, my wife and I both love Japan. She lived in Japan before 30 years ago.
oh, wow.
She went to ASIJ for 1 year.
Oh, wow. So you're both
Um,
ASIJ,
yeah,
not graduates, but ASIJ students. Yeah.
right. She was there for ninth grade, and we were recently in Tokyo, and we saw her old apartment in Dakanyama.
Yeah.
And so she really loves being back to Japan, and so do I.
Hmm. So you get back, and now at Canadian Academy, it's sort of, more or less considered the school, right, on the West Coast. When people say West Coast International School, it's CA. So how has that compared to, on the East Coast, sort of the big international schools, ASIJ? So now you've sort of had quite a bit of experience in both places. How do the two compare?
Canadian Academy is just so much smaller, and I think a little more like ASIJ is a little more transient, like people come and go.
Hmm.
Canadian Academy is a little more like this is people's home for a lot of years,
Hmm.
and it's very, very family oriented and supportive. Not that ASIJ is not, but yeah, Canadian Academy is everybody looks out for each other. It's not overly demanding as far as the amount of hours you have to spend at school.
Hmm.
And that, there are some adorable slices of history. I still listen to cassette tapes at
Hmm.
work. When, I find cassette tapes of old concerts from 1978 and I play those tapes, so everything is kind of quaint and fun. But I think the number one difference is, Canadian Academy is like half or a third the size of ASIJ.
Hmm. That's interesting. And I guess that's just contingent on its location being.
I guess so. Osaka International School is even smaller.
Hmm.
And I don't know why Tokyo needs international schools so much more than Kobe and Osaka, but that's just the way it is right now. The Tokyo schools tend to be so much bigger.
Yeah, I've noticed, and there's just so many, right? Because there's a lot new. There's more newer schools too. So we're talking almost a dozen schools
Yeah,
now in Tokyo.
yeah, yeah, that's right.
So I like to ask guests often, what sort of how their international school experience, led towards their current career, like, if they're a pilot or doctor or whatever. But in your case, it's a pretty linear transition, right? Is in the classroom to in the classroom. But was that I'm deducing because of your positive experiences in Saudi Arabia and in Tokyo?
I think so. I think I looked at my parents and said, teaching kids is pretty wonderful, first of all. It's rewarding. And then teaching kids specifically overseas as opposed to in Arkansas. In music, in Arkansas, you would be expected to do a marching band for football games.
Mm.
And I looked at international school music programs and I saw jazz bands and concert bands and musical theater and things that I really loved more than maybe marching bands for football games.
Mm.
And not that marching bands are bad, but that's just kind of not my passion.
Mm.
And I said, yeah, international teaching is pretty great. There are certainly some downsides. You have to endure some jobs that are not your dream job,
Mm.
and you have to again that word flexibility. Like in Marrakesh, I had to be flexible. I had to teach first graders, and I'm certainly not an elementary music specialist.
Yeah, you put your time in.
Yeah, you just kind of learn what needs to be done.
That's really intriguing. And as we sort of get towards the end here of the podcast, I don't want to get too specific, but at ASIJ, best memories, any shout out to any teachers from that era of the 1990s?
Sure. Obviously music. I'd like to shout out to Brent Huber, who's no longer with us, and Carrie Nichols, who I'm still in touch with. Um, Bruce Bryant was big for me. He was a TV production teacher. So those three are the first that come to mind.
Mm.
And I've been back to visit ASIJ for like 7 different reasons. I've been a substitute there. I've taught drum set private lessons there. Um, there was supposed to be a jazz festival there, and I was going to be a teacher at it, but it was just canceled because of COVID.
Mm.
I, And sometimes I just go back for fun. So honestly, I've been back to ASIJ so much. Um, Jody Fuller has always been so nice to me. She's an elementary music teacher and she's still there. So yeah, it continues to be a big part of my life.
Wow. And what's crazy, so we're about 11 years apart, but yeah, I have had both Jody Fuller, about 3-4 years, and yeah, Mr. Huber. He was phenomenal. I think I had him all of middle school and high school.
Phenomenal. And my predecessor who was here 20 years is now your colleague, right? George Vest.
Yeah, that's correct. It's
Yeah.
interesting how our lives intersect, and I think that's what people love about the international teaching community.
And the whole world becomes kind of your sandbox, and you go over here and play for a while, and go over here and play for a while, but we're all connected.
Yeah. So on that note, let's take it home. So at the end here, I like to ask guests what is to come in the next few years, next few decades. What is on the horizon?
My wife is working on being a full-time international school librarian. I'm sure she will achieve that soon. And we don't know how much longer we'll be at Canadian Academy. We love it here. We absolutely love Kobe. And we could stay here for a long time, but we also could be looking for the next thing. And I'm always writing music, and who knows what the next adventure holds.
Awesome. Yeah, it's cool to hear. God, all those places: Morocco, Peru, Saudi Arabia, Japan, China, and yeah, so many other places, possibly in the future. Well, appreciate having you on, Andrew. And yeah, hopefully maybe we'll meet in person sometime.
I hope,
somewhere.
Nicholas, I hope so. Thank you for this. This was fun.